At this point, you literally cannot make up what has happened in Nebraska football over the last few years. The once storied Cornhuskers have become the most cursed program in all of college football. They invent new ways to lose each and every season, and every year it is complete heartbreak for Huskers fans. 2023 was no different, as the Huskers found a few impossible ways to lose games, managed to implode in the last minute multiple times, and there were literally 2 times where a Nebraska quarterback threw the ball to the other team to allow them to win. It goes much deeper than the 2023 season though. In 2021, Nebraska lost pretty much every game by 1 possession, and some jokingly called them the best 3-9 team of all time. Scott Frost always found a new way to lose, and Nebraska can literally never get over the hump. When it comes to a close game, Nebraska chokes, and this is honestly really sad to see. I was actually rooting for Nebraska the entire time. I'm getting really tired of all the Iowa offense nonsense, and I was hoping Nebraska would get to 6 wins so I can make a video about how Matt Rule built them up. Instead, I watched Chubba Purdy gift Iowa a win, and Nebraska will not be going to a bowl game. In today's video, I want to talk about Nebraska. We're going to talk about all the crazy ways they've lost, why things have been so bad over the last few years, and what my thoughts on both the season and moving forward should be for them. But before we get started, if you're a big college football fan, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and turn on post notifications so you never miss when I upload. Now let's get started and talk about the most cursed program in all of college football, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Also, before we get started with the video, I definitely want to be more interactive with you guys, so be sure to head over to my Instagram and shoot me a message about your thoughts on Nebraska football, why the season was such a disaster, or a video topic you'd like to see me cover in the future. I definitely want to meet more of you guys. So to start out the video, I want to clarify, I am not a hater of Iowa football. I absolutely love their defense and can really appreciate a good Big Ten West game, but the levels of ineptitude on this Iowa offense are honestly getting really annoying, and there's no reason why this team should be a 10-win team, and they just keep finding a way to win, and to non-Iowa fans, it's honestly pretty annoying. But props to the Hawkeyes. You found a way to win 10 games with one of the worst offenses in college football history. That in itself is a fine achievement. As I've said though, Nebraska is a very storied program. They have multiple national championships. Tom Osborne was an absolute legend, and for a while, every high school recruit wanted to be a Husker. That continued on for a long time, until they saw a minor drop-off under Bo Pelini. He pretty much won 9 games each and every season, and after winning all those national championships and being near the top, Nebraska fans were annoyed with this. They wanted to win 12 games, not 9 games, and with the resources and the prestige, many thought they could get back to those winning ways. Instead, Bo Pelini may have cursed the program. Ever since then, things have been an absolute disaster for the Huskers, and honestly, I think Nebraska is truly the most unlucky fan base in all of college football. To get a taste of all that success and all that winning, and to now lose heartbreaker after heartbreaker each and every year, honestly has to suck. Being a fan of college football is a lot of fun, and those heartbreaking losses do really take a toll on people whose whole happiness comes from the sport. But when did all the unluckiness really start? So the first game for Nebraska after the firing of Bo Pelini was a loss in the Holiday Bowl. They ended up losing to the USC Trojans, and from there, they'd have to go out and make a big-time hire. Who do they get? Well, they got the winningest coach in Oregon State football history, Mike Riley. He had turned the Beavers program from nothing into one of the more consistent programs out west, and he was known for his player development and his ability to elevate the roster to winning. That is exactly what Nebraska thought they needed, as maybe with more resources and more prestige like Nebraska had, Riley could take his coaching to the next level. In year 1, the Huskers would end up going 6-7. It wasn't exactly the greatest season in the world, but they did at least win the Foster Farms Bowl. It wasn't a perfect first year, but they had a lot of momentum going into 2016. Tommy Armstrong was back at quarterback, and they had a loaded running back room with a stout defense. They actually ended up getting off to a terrific start in 2016. They started out 7-0, with a notable win coming at home against number 22 Oregon. The Huskers were up to a top 10 team, but unfortunately, they ended up blowing it. They lost in overtime to Wisconsin, got blown out 62-3 by Ohio State, and then got killed by Iowa 40-10. They got matched up with that famous Tennessee team in 2016, and they ended up losing the Music City Bowl. For a team that started out 7-0, going 9-4 was honestly very disappointing. Sadly, that October 22nd against Purdue to get to 7 wins was probably the best moment for Huskers fans in the last decade. Ever since then, it has all gone downhill. In 2017, the Huskers ended up going 4-8 with a 3-6 mark in the Big Ten. That was when Tanner Lee was the quarterback, and they famously lost at home to Northern Illinois. Nebraska decided to fire Mike Riley, and after once being proclaimed the savior, was now in an even worse spot than 9-win Pelini. Oh, how many Huskers fans probably wish they could have still had Pelini at this time, but now they'd have to make the perfect next hire. Luckily, there was a guy who led Nebraska to a national championship, was one of the top coaches in all of college football, and had just resurrected a dead program. This was literally going to be a perfect fit for the Huskers. They were going to bring their quarterback Scott Frost home. He had done wonders with Marcus Mariota at Oregon and had turned around a winless UCF team into one of the best stories in all of college football. He arrived at Nebraska with a ton of fanfare, and many believed that this was truly what they would need to save the program. Instead, it was honestly a disastrous tenure, and in a way, ruined the legacy of Scott Frost at Nebraska. At first, there was obviously a ton of hype, and he brought in a quarterback who could elevate them to the next level. He managed to flip Adrian Martinez from Tennessee, and at the time, he was one of the best quarterbacks in all of high school football. He'd get a chance to start right away, and his first game would come against former Big 12 rival Colorado. In that matchup, it went down to the wire, and while he suffered an injury, Colorado went down and scored late, and spoiled Scott Frost's debut. From there, things didn't get any better as they lost at home to Troy, got blown out by Michigan, beat at home by Purdue, lost on the road to Wisconsin, and then lost in overtime to Northwestern. It was an 0-6 start in Frost's year one, but they would get more competitive by the end of the year. They beat Minnesota, Bethune-Cookman, Illinois, and Michigan State to get to 4 wins. They ended up losing by 3 to Iowa, and that seemingly has become a trend. They went 4-8 in year one, but with Martinez returning and all the Scott Frost hype, many believed they could win the Big Ten West in 2019, and Adrian Martinez was a legitimate Heisman contender. Unfortunately, the season did not start out as planned, as after a win over South Alabama, they went and lost in overtime to Colorado. This would spoil the Nebraska fun, but it would get a lot worse for them. They ended up beating both Illinois and Northern Illinois, but that highly anticipated showdown at number 5 Ohio State did not go according to plan. They got blown out 48-7 at home, and after a win against Northwestern, they free-falled. They lost to Minnesota, Indiana, Purdue, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and notably that Iowa loss was also by 3 points. They did beat both Northwestern and Maryland though, and ended up finishing with a 5-7 record. No bowl game in year 2, and people were slowly starting to lose hope. 2020 would not help anything either, as they only ended up winning 3 games. 1 win came against Penn State, 1 was on the road against Purdue, and 1 was against Rutgers. There really wasn't a whole lot of expectation in 2020 due to everything going on in the world, but 2021 was going to be Frost's big year. It was time for him to make a bowl game or he was going to go home. This is where the curse really begins. Nebraska could not find a way to win a close game in 2021. I mean literally. In week 0, they went on the road and played Illinois, and in a game that I was personally at, I watched Adrian Martinez throw an incompletion, and Illinois won 30-22. Illinois was not that good of a team, and there was no reason Nebraska should have lost this game. They did beat both Fordham and Buffalo before the 1-possession losses started to really pile up. They actually went on the road and put up a fight against number 3 Oklahoma, but ended up losing 23-16. After that, Michigan State would beat them 23-20 in overtime, and they had that game won, but Jaden Reed had an incredible punt return. After that, they beat Northwestern 56-7 and got to 3-3. At this point, the Huskers were definitely super competitive, and many thought that they could easily get to a bowl game. There were a couple of winnable games on the schedule. Their next game would come against number 9 Michigan, and this game was a lot of fun. Nebraska's stadium was rocking, and they had an opportunity to win the game, but unfortunately, they couldn't convert, and Michigan won by way of a field goal. That one sucked. After that, they went on the road to Minnesota, and ended up losing that game 30-23. It wouldn't get any better the following week, as when Purdue came to town, they stormed back late, but couldn't get a stop, and Purdue won 28-23. They lost by 1 possession in their last 3 games, and now would have to win out if they wanted to make a bowl game. They would officially be eliminated after a loss to Ohio State, and while it wasn't the most competitive game in the world, they did only lose by 9 points at home. Now they were 3-7. After that, they went on the road to number 15 Wisconsin, and actually almost won that game. They ended up losing by 7. For the final game of the year, they'd play against number 16 Iowa, and you guessed it, they lost by 1 possession. The Huskers ended up going 3-9 with a 1-8 mark in the Big Ten. They won all 3 of their games by way of blowout, and all 9 of their losses were by 9 or less points. You truly couldn't make it up, and many believe that Nebraska was the best 3-9 team to ever walk this earth, me included. That was the thing though, they were willing to give Frost one more chance because of how competitive the team did look, but immediately things would fall apart in week 0 again. Against Northwestern and Ireland, the Huskers got off to a hot start, but ended up completely blowing it to Northwestern, losing 31-28. This Northwestern team was absolutely atrocious, and this was a horrible, horrible way to start out the year. After struggling with North Dakota for a little while, they eventually put them away, and then they lost at home to Georgia Southern. Now it was time to pull the plug, and Scott Frost was officially fired. This was sad for the former Huskers superstar quarterback. In his 5th year, he went 16-31 and had a 34% winning percentage. This was the 2nd worst amongst all Nebraska coaches who lasted more than 4 years, and things got so bad that they even fired him with a humongous buyout still to pay. Unfortunately, everything fell apart for the Frost era, and while he did recruit and at times had a competitive roster, he just couldn't get over the hump, and the taste of all of those heartbreaking victories added up enough to make them decide to fire him. From there, Mickey Joseph would take over as the interim head coach, and they actually saw a modest amount of success. They'd end up losing to Oklahoma pretty badly, but they would beat Indiana and Rutgers. This got them back to 3-3, and they would have a chance to make a bowl game. But you guessed it, they had a couple of one-possession losses which would hold them back. They ended up losing by 6 on the road to Purdue, lost by 7 at home to Minnesota, and lost by 1 at home against Wisconsin. These would end up being the Daggers, as they would also lose on the road to number 3 Michigan and get blown out by number 17 Illinois. Luckily, they would finish the season on a high note with a 7-point victory over Iowa, but it was too little too late. The team went 4-8 with a 3-6 mark in the conference, and fans were so sick of it. They had 5 losses by single digits in 2022, and it looks like nothing changed in 2023. Nebraska decided they were to go out and pay big money to get an established coach, as they lured Matt Rule there. He's a guy who is known for player development and has been able to take bad teams and make them good in no time. While technically, according to his trend, he usually has a bad first year and then breaks out in year 2, many were optimistic that he could have a good year 1. He brought in Jeff Sims from Georgia Tech, and some thought Nebraska could be a sleeper. Instead, they went back to their normal ways in week 1, as on that Thursday night game against Minnesota, it was 4th and goal, and they were up 10-3. Nebraska was going to win, but then Daniel Jackson had the most ridiculous catch of the entire year on 4th and goal, and Minnesota tied the game. Right after that, Jeff Sims threw an interception, and Minnesota walked it off with a game-winning field goal. Nebraska found a new impossible way to lose, and I'm sure they were all pulling their hair out. In week 2, they play against Coach Prime's Colorado Buffaloes, and with all the national media at that game, Nebraska got blown out 36-14. Honestly, if the two played again, I actually think Nebraska would win, but it wasn't a great look. After that, they took care of 2 bad opponents in Northern Illinois and Louisiana Tech before hosting number 2 Michigan. No one had any expectation in this game, but it would have been a statement if Matt Rule could pull this off. Nope, he didn't. They lost 45-7. The team was now 2-3, and many had already given up on Nebraska for the year. Except, this team didn't. From there, they went on the road and beat Illinois 20-7, took care of Northwestern at home 17-9, and then survived against Purdue 31-14. Nebraska was now 5-3. They were 1 win away from a bowl game, and guess what? They'd have to play a really bad Michigan State team, could host a struggling Maryland team, Wisconsin was starting to fall off, and Iowa had a horrible offense. Honestly, all 4 of those games were winnable, but instead Nebraska picked the most heartbreaking option. They lost all 4 of them by 1 possession. You cannot make this up. They ended up losing to the Spartans 20-17 after having plenty of opportunities to win that, but no worries, they had 3 more chances. After that, they'd play Maryland, and with the game tied 10-10, Maryland drove down the field and kicked a game-winning field goal. Alright, they were 5-5 now, but they just needed 1 more win. They go on the road to play against Wisconsin, and in that matchup, they get to overtime. Unfortunately for them, the Badgers would score a touchdown, and they did not convert, and now they were 5-6. With 3 chances to lock up bowl eligibility, they lost all 3 of them by a combined 13 points. Then there was today, against number 17 Iowa. All Nebraska had to do was win, and they could make a bowl game, and no one would really care about the last 3 games. After tying at 10-10, Nebraska had multiple opportunities on Iowa's side of the field, but they played more of the field position game and couldn't really get much going. And then Iowa pretty much gifted them the victory. Deacon Hill had a horrific pass, and it was intercepted and was probably going to be taken to about the 40-yard line. They needed about 10 more yards to get into field goal range, but instead there was a holding call on the return. This would bump them back 15 yards, but no worries, they could probably make a couple of plays and get down the field and walk it off. Instead, Chubba Purdy threw one of the worst interceptions I've ever seen, as he just didn't even see the Iowa defensive lineman, and right as he threw it, the lineman put his hands up, caught the ball, and returned it about 10 yards. Iowa was approximately 4 yards away from field goal range, then they ran it for about 20 yards up the middle, lined it up the middle, kicked a walk-off winner, and left the stadium with a win. Somehow, Iowa's a 10-win team, and have miraculously found another way to win. Nebraska, though, had an all-time meltdown. With 4 chances to go to a bowl game, they lost all 4 of them by 1 possession, and this was twice this season where their quarterback literally threw the game away. Jeff Sims in week 1, and Chubba Purdy in week 14. They started and ended the season the same way, with stupidity and heartbreak. I honestly feel bad for Nebraska fans because this just absolutely sucks. They're a historic program, they have a great fan base, and I want to see them good again. But seemingly they keep putting their foot in their mouth and can never get anything going. I'm pretty sure they lost to Iowa 3 of the last 4 years by way of a game-winning field goal, and maybe next year Nebraska will finally figure it all out. I know we've been saying that every year since 2017, but at some point, statistically, it just has to happen. I don't know how it's possible to lose all of these close games, but Nebraska always finds a way to do it, and this just sucks. I truly do believe in Matt Rule, but my goodness, How can it get any worse than this? That's really all I have to say, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a like. If you're a Nebraska fan, let me know your thoughts down below, and also be sure to shoot me a message on Instagram, as I'd love to interact with you guys more. Also, check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about how Elijah Drinkwitz rebuilt Mizzou football. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.